Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tessa Horn, and I'm a Global Customer Success Manager here at Gainsight. And today I have four wonderful panelists with me to discuss identifying and managing risk within your customer base. So to kick things off, I'd like to do a quick round of introductions with my panelists as well as an icebreaker. And today our icebreaker is, what was the most pivotal moment of your career and why? So I'll give you all a moment to think about your answers. I can go ahead and start. So my first pivotal moment in my career was actually a few months into my first job out of college. I was on the sales team as a business development representative, and I heard about an open opportunity on the customer success team. I didn't know very much about customer success, but I decided to give it a try, and I've been in customer success ever since. I feel very lucky that I had the opportunity at the start of my career to transition to customer success, especially as it's continued to grow over the years. So that's my pivotal moment. I'll pass it over to you, Erika, to give an intro and tell us more about your pivotal career moment.
Thanks, Tessa. Hello, everyone. My name is Erika Cowan. I'm based just outside of Toronto, Canada, and I lead the customer success organization at F5. And that has included building our capabilities and organization over the last 3 years, and also integrating a number of customer success teams because we've had 4 acquisitions in that same time period. So pivotal career moment for me. There was one that happened roughly 10 years ago. I had accepted a new role with a technology company based out of Australia that was starting up North American business operations, and I was going to lead that for them. 2 weeks in, I got a phone call from the president, who was sort of on a once-in-a-lifetime family trip, extended parents, siblings, kids, and he had had 3 of his key leaders resign that week while he was overseas, and called me on a Friday in Toronto and asked if I could be in Sydney on Monday to help bring some stability to customers and to the team. So what started as a 2-week, yes, I'll be there Monday, turned into a year. I took on the VP of Global Operations role and learned a ton, both from a personal and professional perspective. It ended up being somebody that worked for me in Sydney that called me when I was back in Toronto, still doing the role, but remotely, and told me that they had joined this incredible company, F5, and that I could they make an intro? And so here I am 6.5 years later, still at F5, very happy. And I think my takeaway for everyone in their career is take those big risks and challenges. Every one of them builds your experience and your network, and those are the things that will continue to open doors for you and for your life and your career as you move forward. Thanks, Tessa.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, I will pass it to you, Kim.
Great. Thanks, Tessa. And hi, everyone. My name is Kim Humphrey, and I am a Vice President of Customer Success at IBM. And so we are cross-unit, around the world presence, helping our customers be successful with their hybrid cloud and AI strategy. And my story and my pivotal moment is very similar. I grew up, if I use those words, in development. So I was a developer, I led development, I managed development, I owned some of our products that we released. And I had the opportunity, I had a similar experience with a call to say, hey, I was living in Boston at the time, and say, what do you think about Cleveland, Ohio? And I said, well, I don't really know. I haven't thought much about Cleveland, Ohio. I have some family there, but okay. I had the opportunity to take on a job with an acquisition we were doing in development, but I actually took an assignment and moved to Ohio for a couple of years. And it got me away from the people I knew, the sponsors and stakeholders I knew, the clients I knew, the area I knew, and really got me comfortable being willing to step into the unknown. And since then, I've done it multiple times, and obviously now here, very happy for the last about 6 years in customer success, as I've shifted from developing the products that they use to helping them be successful with them.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kim. From there, I'll go to you, Ella.
These are good stories. So pleasure to be here. Ella Dillon. I'm Chief Customer Officer at Conversica, and I'm out of Seattle. And I had fun with this question. I'll go in my Wayback Machine at AT&T. And it's similar. There's a similar theme here of you say yes when people ask. And I'd been running a portfolio of investments at AT&T, and they were spinning up a new customer experience organization, their first ever. Customer experience 3.0 hadn't been written. Customer experience 2.0 hadn't been written. Nobody really kind of knew what this customer experience thing was. And it was a lovely opportunity because it allowed me to synthesize a lot of sort of my mental framework of what matters if you want to be a truly customer-centric company. It was the first time I was really able to think through of, UI is important, rewards and recognition is important, but if you really want to be a truly customer-centric company, the entire platform matters. Like what are the systems and tools you're implementing? What's the prioritization of the product you're deploying? How are you investing in your talent? How are you listening and acting on what your customers say? And really kind of putting it into an entire framework that is really about building a company inside out that can listen outside in. So that was the first time where I had this aha and had a name for this thing I love doing. And I've had the privilege since of seeking out, high growth companies that are really innovative where I get to do this. So that was the privilege of where I had a name for the thing that I love to do. So that was sort of my pivotal moment.
Love it. Yeah, I definitely am seeing the theme here. It sounds like when opportunity calls, you say yes. I like that. Dave, last but not least, what is your pivotal moment and what is an intro to your role as well?
So first up, Dave Greenberg. I'm the Senior Vice President of Client Success here at ADP. Responsible really for leading the team that, I'll say drives success with our most valuable, most strategic clients across ADP and our, national account and global enterprise group. We obviously spend our time, just like everybody else sounds like describing, with really driving optimization and high utilization of our solutions, and that's where 90% of our time is spent. So my most pivotal moment is definitely I had left ADP for a short period of time, for 4 years, and after about 4 years of kind of being an individual contributor again, after leading teams for so long, it hit me that I was like, you know what? I really miss what I love most, what energizes me, which is leading people and developing teams and building what I love to do, which is drive value to customers through a team of people. And that was when I realized, you know what? I could probably continue my role in it as a global individual contributor, or I could go back to an organization that really values leadership, develops people. And so I was oddly enough recruited. So back to, I think everybody else said the same thing about kind of answering when the door knocks. I was recruited back to ADP at around the same time and couldn't possibly, say no to it. So that's it.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I'm glad that all of these moments led us here today to talk a little bit more about customer success and managing risk. So, within customer success, part of the job is managing risky customer situations. Some are maybe more challenging to manage than others. And so I'm curious, to start off by just thinking about, what is one of the most challenging type of risks to manage and why? And maybe Ella, we can start with you.
Sure. And I'll go straight for the moment, which probably feels very familiar to, I'd say, all the peers on the phone here today. But I think right now, the biggest risk is the change in jobs today. When your executive sponsor turns over, or your executive sponsor turns over, and their boss turns over, and their boss turns over. And so, you're simple of multi-threaded, how do you have a sense of a relationship, and how do you then go build credibility back in a company when that sort of whole bench might turn over, which in this moment in time, I think in the world is not uncommon. And so I think that's one of the riskiest situations for us right now as we think that through.
Definitely. I think that actually kind of is a good starting point because, if we're thinking about how we manage risky customer situations, well, first, how do we identify them? Like, how do we understand where there is risk across our business, across the book of business? So, another question I have is, what are some of the most common risk scenarios outside of, being single threaded within an organization, and how are those types of risks identified today? Erika, I'll pass this one to you.
Sure. Thanks, Tessa. I recently had the opportunity this past quarter to get really deep on this topic. So I led a churn summit across our company based on the acquisitions that I mentioned in my intro. We have, many flavors or, differences in our products and in the churn results that we were seeing, and wanting to understand in certain areas where, where there might be issues and what we could do to fix them. And so going through, we looked at the Salesforce reason codes, we got anecdotal feedback from the renewals managers, from CSMs, et cetera. There is a variety of reasons that come up across different products, but two that were top of mind that we thought were most easily actionable, and maybe because of my CS hat, were low adoption and low value realization. And it was very timely because as I was digging into this work, it was when the customer success index report came out from Gainsight. And there's that one specific slide that called out, 50% of customers or vendors, companies look at product utilization as the key churn indicator. And that really resonated with me because when we looked at our own business, the areas where we have that utilization, we have almost no churn. Our customer success managers can be very proactive if they see somebody slow to onboard, and we've been very successful there. The areas where we had more challenge is where we're blind, where we didn't see, is the customer using, is their usage changing? And so to get crafty, I created a visual for our executives to show the customer journey and the ownership journey. And we use language in the customer's terms like, deploy, use, realize value, optimize, renew. Do we have any insights into the journey? And sort of color coded, red, green, yellow. So red means no visibility whatsoever. Yellow would mean, yes, if we go into this system, we could manually pull something. And green means, yes, we've got it. It's in Gainsight. We've got automated calls to action. We're good to go. And so creating that visibility really helped drive momentum in the organization from a product and executive level. So from that output of that work, we were able to get every product GM to step up and say, give a commitment to say in the next 2 to 6 quarters, we will provide product utilization data. And so my hope is to go in each quarter and then show the boxes going from yellow to green, as we move forward. And I think, the original question comes back to, I know you mentioned, is it automated? Is it manual effort? I think that we're always going to use a little bit of both. Product utilization ideally should be automated and digitally consumed. You're also having things like sentiment analysis that can be digitally done, through surveys and tools like Gong, et cetera. But then there's the success plans from your CSMs where you're going to get that anecdotal feedback as well. So I think over time we'll get more digital, but it's going to be a bit of both for the short term.
Anything to add from the rest of the panelists? All right, well, with that, I think another critical piece of this conversation is talking about understanding the data that you have available to you. So a lot of times there are infinite data points that you can look at to understand where there might be risk within your customer base, but it's hard to understand sometimes which of those data points you should pay most attention to, which of them should weigh most heavily in your health score, and how you can make a really clear and easy to understand health score for your team. So Kim, I know that you've done a lot of work in this area. I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. And I'm going to bridge off of what Erika was just talking about, that usage data where you've got it is one of the most insightful, because it gives you that checkpoint of, are they using it the way sometimes they think they're using it? Yeah. Sometimes I've worked with a sponsor who thinks that they are using it in one way, and it may not actually be how we see them using it, which is an opportunity to interject in that risk moment. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the key things for us, now we've had a number of different data science projects going. We're a big data company. We have lots of data in all different ways. We've got support data, NPS data, usage data, data from our CSMs, data from all different angles. And I think the key thing is there's no right or wrong answer. And when you start to think about a health score and how you automate those and try and say, well, I've got to use all of this because it's all valuable. It is all valuable, but you've got to start somewhere. And you've got to start somewhere such that you get a sense, is that giving you good insights? Yes or no? And then you can iterate on it and continue to add value. When you try and boil the ocean and pull in everything at once, the challenge is if it's not flagging right, you don't actually know why. Mm-hmm. So really one of the things for us is to start small. And then you look at it and say, okay, right now, I know which customers we had flagged as yellow or red for the next 3 quarters. You best believe as these quarters go on, we're doing the review to say, were we right? And what can I tell about which measure was yellow, green, or red? Which measure was wrong? And how do you adjust that? But the other thing is use your intuition. What you hear from customers, what you hear coming back from your teams is really valuable in that it can help you know where to start. If you hear it constantly coming up in one area, that's a great place to start. It doesn't make everything else bad. It doesn't mean you don't want to get to everything else. It just helps you with where to start.
I love that, Kim. Can I just jump in on that? I loved your idea of sort of subtraction. That's where I went in my mind is in my last several companies, I think we start, there might be 30 different dashboards that everybody's looking at, and data is not insight, right? And so making sure that you've brokered with your stakeholders what truly will drive insight and which insight really matters, and then looking at that, I think that that's sort of actually a really critical exercise for all companies. And Erika, I love what you said is always going to be the balance of art and science, right? Because someone might have 100% utilization and look great, but then again, if their stakeholder has churned, you're at risk. And that might be through relationships. It's rarely going to show up in your data very easily that way, right? So it has to be the combo. There's things off the page that are driving risk that you can't necessarily report on. So you need to wed them both for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good, Erika. No, I was just going to say, to add on to that, a very common quote that you might have already heard is, data tends to point to the right questions, not to the right answers. And if you think of it that way, that it really leads you to asking the right questions about what you're seeing in the data. You're rarely going to find the right answer just by looking at the data. But then when you dig deeper and you start to look into some of the, what it's telling you, that's where the rich insights come from. So.
And I would just, don't underestimate the cultural aspect of this. We've all worked for a leader that red was bad. That you don't come in and you don't say anybody's red. In the customer success world, I actually applaud the red because it means we're flagging something early enough to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Red to me in customer success is they defected and that ship has sailed. And so don't underestimate, for any of the leaders on the call, the cultural aspect of celebrating that we're flagging something early versus reacting to, oh my gosh, there's something being flagged. Because in order to get ahead of risk, you've got to make that okay.
That's a great point, Kim.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of the general risk process. And then when we think about how you want your team to manage risk from there. So obviously, first you want your health score and other data points to tell you where there might be risk, but you also want to make sure that you're taking the right action at the right time to get in front of it. And if you have a culture that supports, managing that risk and identifying it, then you have a better chance of bringing those risks to a close earlier. And so I'm curious, kind of to talk a little bit more about what is that risk process. What does it look like for you today? How do you expect your teams to manage risks? Obviously, it might be different from scenario to scenario, but I think to your point, Kim, it's more generally, as a culture, how do you think about managing risks and how do you expect your teams to manage risks? Dave, I'll pass it to you to start there.
Thanks. And apologize for the earlier technical difficulties there. What I would say is, first of all, is coming to grips with the fact of what is risk, and risk is unknown by definition. That is what makes it a risk. And so, funny enough, I have a mentality red and yellow clients are actually not really that risky. We kind of know what's going on there. There's not much risk left, unfortunately, at that point. The real risk that is the iceberg under the waterline is our green clients, actually. And so, funny enough, one of the things that we're trying to focus on is when you think about being proactive, and we all talk about being proactive, strategic client success leaders and client success executives and managers, we think about, doing the work for, the client that is bringing insight and or delivering value. And unfortunately, when you're talking about a red client or potentially a yellow client, depending on how you're defining that risk, odds are it's probably reactive at that point. The proactivity at that point is really reacting to something that you picked up on already. And so moving the fight upfield, moving the real work back to where the client is green and we're really adding the value is where a lot of our focus and attention is kind of going. And if you want to stay strategic with your client, the idea is like the thing that not everybody thinks about. I didn't introduce myself as this, but I spent 20 years in sales. I can assure you that the sales folks that are your competitors are highly tuned, highly trained at creating disruption in your client base. They wake up every morning thinking, how can I challenge, bring insight, or create a potential vision or an outcome for a client that will make them want to meet with me or buy from me? And unfortunately, a lot of times as client success people, right, leaders, frontline people, right, executives, managers, whatever title it is that you use, we're not thinking like that. We're thinking about how do we keep the client green? How do we keep the client happy? How do we keep the client satisfied? Not how do we disrupt ourselves and bring that next level of what we can do for the organization that's far bigger than just the day-to-day, fixing things and or making things, step better or incrementally better. So I think that's, everybody has said it right. I don't want to be too redundant about the idea of, manual updates, predictive, automated, and obviously account reviews where we identify risk. And we all have similar systems, and obviously we must all use Gainsight, I would think. Hopefully everybody does. But what I would tell you is outside of that, it's a philosophy about where do you spend your time and your focus.
Dave, there's a couple things that really resonated for me there. That Churn Summit work that I mentioned, a key thing for me was to make sure that the actions I took back to the company weren't just the customer success organization actions, but the actions as a company that we needed to take. And sort of two of the ones that I didn't mention earlier were, is our product delivering, is the reality aligned with the value that customers expected, number one? And if it isn't, what's the product roadmap plan to address that? And then number two is product differentiation, so that we are creating a product that is different from our competitors, and we're showcasing a roadmap that our customers understand that. So exactly what you're saying, like, are we disrupting ourselves so that our customers see what's coming? And the other piece too is that, we had the opportunity based on some of the acquisitions to see different flavors of customer success. And one of the teams that joined my organization was a quota carrying renewals team. And so they got engaged very late in the life cycle in the third or fourth quarter, before renewal, to try and bring that renewal home and grow it. And one of the items that we really wanted to focus on is bringing the customer success motions earlier in the journey, because, we don't want to be those emergency room doctors that are trying to save the patient at the end. We know if we're doing everything right at the beginning and putting the right foundations in place, then it makes the renewal, much easier later in the journey. And so just, a few things that you touched on there that really resonated for me, and some of the things we're seeing in our business as well.
Yeah, what I sort of reduced down what you said, which I thought was super important, is, our biggest enemy is complacency. Like, just because you have a green customer base does not mean that they're healthy and not thinking about other things. And especially if you take for granted customers that have renewed several times, it's probably about the time that they have glut, they have bugs, they have product features they now knew they wish they had. They might have content that hasn't been governed. They might have turnover of expertise. They might get pretty far away from understanding the ROI and start thinking about other things in the landscape. And so I do think that again, making sure that we're activated and not at stasis with these customers of how are you actually showing that we're at the forefront of innovation. person? What's the thought leadership? What's the return on investment at sort of different levels appropriately so they understand? As well as, I agree, it's sort of the full body work of a company. Like, I heard you in product and you saw the changes. I heard you that you needed this in the training and we created it. So again, it's really being instrumented to listen and learn and do is really critical. Otherwise, the green is definitely, a yellow or red waiting to happen for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I think what I'm hearing is how do we move more toward proactive motions that keep a customer green rather than only focusing on reacting to what we're seeing within, the customers that are considered red. I love that. One other, thought when we're thinking about, identifying where there might be risk and also understanding why customers are leaving is obviously talking about churn. So learning from churned customers. I'm curious, from your perspective, how you are taking learnings from your churned customers to bring that into your existing risk process, because I think you bring up a lot of really good points about, sales team members from other companies, coming after your customers. And in those scenarios where maybe they're successful, how do you take those learnings and bring that back so that you're able to get in front of that moving forward? Erika, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Tessa. And I think I touched on this a little bit in the last question, just to say like the things that we took out of our churn investigation. I spoke to the product pieces, and then the first one that was top of our list is really that churn risk identification and mitigation. One thing that we found is that we, again, because of the acquisitions, we had different levels of health scoring, different levels of visibility. Not everyone was in Gainsight yet. We've moved most groups in, but not everyone. And so where we hadn't done that, we didn't have as much visibility of really when a customer was red. It wasn't captured in a central system where technical account manager, CSM, sales were all sort of seeing the same information. And so for us, churn risk identification mitigation is two things for me. There's the here and now, what do we need to do immediately, manually? And then there's the future of that product utilization piece that gives us the automated visibility in a lot of ways as we go forward. So those are kind of the things that come to mind for me my other commitment on this Churn Summit work is that this isn't a one-time project. This is something that, on an ongoing basis, we need to continue to review this each quarter and continue our learnings. The truth is that we're relatively early on in our subscription and SaaS journey at F5. And what that means is we don't actually have a ton of churn. So, you might lose 8 customers in a quarter and you're trying to make, grand statements around what actions we need to take. And so for us, it's continuing to learn in the quarters to come and continue to, edit our plans. And I agreed with Kim's comment a lot earlier too, that you have to start somewhere. And then, if you've got a 94% green health score, but a 20% churn, then there's a disconnect. Your health score isn't really telling you what it should. And then, you need to go tweak that. So.
Totally. It's not a set it and forget it motion. Exactly. It's constantly evolving and it's reiterative all the time. Makes sense.
Yeah. At IBM, we have kind of a mantra of no surprises. So we really try to get to no surprises. It ties back with early identification. It ties back with the, not being complacent and all of a sudden, surprise, something has happened. But the other piece is the thing that you're hearing about the most right now may or may not be your biggest problem. And so there's an aspect of, as you're scaling out risk identification into large groups, identify those buckets that you want to start breaking down. Because if you identify those buckets of what's causing, whether it's risk that we're identifying but may not have happened yet, or things that have happened and reasons why we've lost a customer, knowing what those are and being able to quantify how many, what the size of those are, what are the dynamics around what types of deals, even how did we go to market? Are we seeing a problem in one channel versus another? As you start to look through some of those dynamics, it will help inform the actions you take. But as Erika said, it's not a customer success problem, it's a business problem. because those insights are necessary for everybody from your back-end systems and your people that are doing quote to cash and how they do business interactions, to our support, to our products, all the way across the board. And it's about bringing those data and insights that customer success is able to capture with a level of detail that we don't otherwise get in other parts of our business, and share that back so that we can continue to transform every company, because every company is constantly evolving.
Great point. And one quick comment that I'll say is I love the no surprises thing. I think we probably all live in that world. So I like how easily said you put it. But I think that, we do like a regression analysis, otherwise known as a postmortem, when we lose a client. And to your point, bucket them and make sure we understand the main reasons. But the thing that's most interesting to me is always looking for those weak signals that we miss, because there's weak signals every day. Whether the client's staying with you and they love you, or they're going to be shopping, or they hate you, there's weak signals. The minute something, every single day they're putting them out there, it's just a question of picking up on them. And so my biggest question is always like, where were we? How did we miss this weak signal? And what can we do differently to make sure we pick up this weak signal in the future in other customer scenarios? So that's the little tidbit I'd throw out there. But thanks, Kim. That was great insight.
Yeah, it's doing a real root cause analysis to understand, how you can improve that in the future and maybe not miss it in the future.
And I'll circle back to the conversation we were having around what are the data sources you pull into a health score. Mm-hmm. That informs what's your next data source that you need to kind of continue to iterate so that you don't miss it next time.
Also, Kim, going back to what you're saying about culture, because culture matters, right? Like what Dave was implying is there's an active curiosity and an investment in the front line to not just take for face value what they're seeing and hearing and observing, right? And Kim, when I was reducing down in my mind what you're saying of like, again, as we're saying, data is an insight, and insight doesn't matter if there's no action. So it's a company commitment to understand and learn and take action based on churn. But the art of what the CSM or what success brings, support, services, everybody is hopefully, Dave, to your point, looking actively and creatively at what those weak signals are, which means you just can't be passive. Again, it's like the complacency is the enemy, right? Piece of, because the data might not pick up a weak signal. That's the whole point. It's like 3 clicks behind the other. And right. So it's back to the activated workforce, and like you can't have true customer success if you don't have like a true activated and invested workforce, because you need them to be hungry to understand and bring it back to the team.
Yeah, just building off of, I think, kind of comments from everyone, like one of the ideas that we've been bouncing around and is you've got your support organization who often is like handling reactive, support inquiries, but who better to have a finger on the pulse in like en masse of a customer was happy or unhappy with the way the situation was resolved. So, we've been brainstorming like the equivalent of an easy button, which is just like the red button that they hit in their support tools that would feed to Gainsight to alert a CSM that like, hey, I just handled my support case and this customer was not completely happy. It's solved, but there's a sentiment problem here that CS team, you might want to go investigate further. And so like it just ties into the things we're speaking about. Like you need to have a culture across the company where everyone cares that, it's not just I'm going to take my next case, but I actually care that somebody who, can spend some more time with this customer and try and, right the ship.
I really like that. It's not only just looking at case volume or duration of a case, it's looking at how did it end and what was the sentiment at the end of that, and how do we use that to close the loop with that customer or, make things right. Totally makes sense. One other thing that we've talked about, just kind of thinking about, how to learn from churn. One of the other questions is there a churn problem, or is there maybe an on-time renewal problem? And, how do you manage that? How do you have the right grace period for that? And so, Erika, I know that we kind of talked a little bit about this. I'm curious to hear your perspective there as well.
Yeah, and for me, it's still more of a question than an answer. So, I was doing the work that I mentioned over the last few quarters, in some situations it came up like, do we have a true churn issue or do we have an on-time renewal issue? And I'll give you an example. One product line from an acquisition, still on legacy contracts, there's a little bit more heavy lifting that has to take place when they go through their renewal. And we might see, 70% on-time renewal, but in one quarter, if you look at it, it's 97% renewed. And so the question becomes, do you have a grace period to allow your organization to to handle those types of scenarios? Or because today we are currently calling it churn on, 1 day past renewal date, it's considered churn. Something that we have started to do in our QBR this quarter is capture what we would classify as recoverable. So, what is not churned and it hasn't been renewed on time, but we believe that we can still catch it. And then going back, like when we get into next quarter, we would do a look back of what had actually been recovered. So we're not going to do it, till the end of time, but looking at having a one quarter lagging indicator of where we landed. So for me, it was more of a question to the group here to say, do you have a grace period? Don't you? How do you all handle it?
So I guess I'll just jump in and sort of maybe answer it differently than you want, but I think also it's a moment of time, right? So I think how we handled it 3 years ago is different than how we've been handling it over COVID, when the whole world is sort of adjusting. So, again, trying to be customer centric. If our customers need grace, we've been giving it, within reason. It's not like a year full of free product or anything like that. But I think we're now trying to reevaluate. And I think you had two different questions. The one is, what do you do for your customer? And the two is, how do you account for it in your own your own reporting? So I'll answer the customer one, which is we've been trying to be flexible with sort of what's going on in the world. And I think, again, I have a question, not an answer. We're trying to figure out how does that evolve now as we're in this new next phase of where we are. Maybe not a useful build, but there you go.
Thanks, Ella.
And I was about to say, Erika, we probably have a slightly different model just because of the nature of our business. And it's not only a software as a service, but also a true delivery of a processing where, we can't just stop giving people products because they didn't renew their contract. They continue to process their payroll with us. Obviously, we continue delivering. But again, to your point, we do track and we're trying to drive to, being proactive on renewals and forecasting them out and obviously getting in front of it as opposed to waiting until the quarter of or even, the semi-annual of. But I think that the key is really just, working with the client back to, I think we've been talking about it quite a bit to everybody on the call, understanding the client first, using the data to your advantage, but really making sure that we are putting the client relationship first and meeting them where they want to be met. And usually that works out for the best. Although it doesn't look as neat on a spreadsheet, it's usually the best answer.
Thanks, Steve.
Awesome. One of the other areas that I wanted to bring up is talking a little bit about managing channel conflict risk. And so Ella, I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
Where I have more questions than answers, you mean? That question? So I think a lot of it, maybe this gets back down to risk, like really the root, I think, of what I was interested in having this panel talk about is how do you manage your risk through channels, right? Where you don't have access, you're one click away from all the data and maybe their health scores and maybe X, Y, and Z. So you're really in an influencing position and an enablement position and train the trainer position. In some cases, you might have access to data. In other cases, you don't, especially depending on the centralized model. So I'm going to cheat, Tessa, and I'm going to turn this question on my peers and ask if they have any sort of insight or best practices about how they're doing it. I mean, obviously we're doing all those things I just mentioned, train the trainer, influence, come up with brokered KPIs and definition of what success looks like in advance. Making sure that they understand we want the NPS of their end customers, not because it's punitive, but because we want to be able to act on it, for example. And NPS is not a perfect tool, by the way. But anyway, so we're doing all those things, but I'm curious how everybody else is managing risk through indirect. And you were talking about channel conflict, and it's slightly different flavor, but I feel like on par with what we're trying to talk about today with churn risk, de-risking any indirect or partner landscape. I'd be curious how the team is thinking about it other than the things I just mentioned.
So Ella, I can jump in. Like we have a huge channel business as well at F5, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Like that data sharing is really what's key. We often are thinking about it from the lens of, I talked a lot about us needing product utilization across all of our products. Well, our partners and channel need that from us as well. And so myself and our head of channel partners, we are like this, and we're always like brainstorming on how we can, bring everyone along on our journey. But I also highlighted this past quarter, I've got a scrappy team, and they created a smart sheet dashboard for partners as a pilot. And, they populate it once a quarter with a sort of a Gainsight dump that would say, like, here's the customers that you are supporting, here's their renewal rate, here's their utilization, here's any Gainsight notes from the executive summary. And so we did, look for two-way value exchange. So in order for them to sort of unlock the dashboard, we asked them to capture use case and share a few things back with us. And so there's this two-way value exchange that's happening. So I said to my executives, do not take this as an indicator. We do not need a long-term better tool, but this is what we're doing to sort of fill the gap in the short term as a way to try and share data. Because I think that's really what's key. If we want to rely on our partners to help us, we need to enable them with the tools to do so. So that's my scrappy answer.
It's a good one. I would build, I guess, more on just like you have to have your customers understand return on investment. Partners are often selling or serving many different vendors. And so if you're not a priority for them, you're not going to get, the customers of you are not going to do great. So you do have to have this same thing as Dave was saying of, don't be complacent about agreeing. You can't be complacent about your partners and their priorities. You have to be in there kind of, this is where a CSM or an enablement manager is consistently selling into a partnership about why it matters. Like, why are their customers successful and how are we going to help them do it? Because there's a lot of noise, I think, in those partnerships as well.
I think there's also an aspect of what is the partner strategy? Right. So some of our partners are implementation partners. So they not only sell the software, they also are in there helping configure it, get it going, up and running. And that's a slightly different relationship than some of our other partners that might just be in there helping sell. Right. And then there's the question of, okay, does that partner have a customer success motion? How do I get them to understand? I mean, we feel in this community that customer success has been around for so long, everybody gets it. The reality is they don't. And so how do you help continue to advocate and help everybody understand what customer success is, the value of customer success, the return on investment on continuing that engagement? Because sometimes they don't have the insight either.
Awesome. Well, with the few minutes that we have left, I have one more closing question for each of you, which is, if you could give every CSM one piece of advice when managing risks, what would it be? Kim, I'll start with you.
I'm going to go with trust your gut and ask the question. If there's something you think you're sensing, but you can't quite put your finger on it, go ask the questions, because often our gut is right. We just may not be able to articulate why.
Totally agree. 100%. Dave, what about you?
Kim just took mine, so I'm going to come up with a second one real fast. What I would say is definitely continue to challenge. Do not assume that because you challenged when you first met them and you set up, a success plan and the direction, that it's like a set it and forget it. You need to be challenging every single day, bringing insight, and you'll know you do it right when the customer says to you, I never even thought of that. You don't want them, when they say, yeah, that just means that you're just reaffirming their thought. You're bringing insight and challenging when they go, I never even thought of it that way. And that's when you're really making a difference. So
love that. I'm going to take that one and use it for sure. Ella, what about you?
So I don't think there's a CSM out there that wouldn't feel like they're often the kitchen sink. They have to do support, they have to do advisory, sometimes they're training. And so it's always a struggle around time and how do they get across their book so they don't have the surprises. And I think often anyone who's worked for me has heard me say this is, please don't mistake motion for momentum. So if you are just a set it, forget it meeting and you don't have an agenda, you don't have an outcome you're driving, if you're doing everything under the sun, is everything under the sun important? Because it might not be, and if you can unlock a lot of valuable time for yourself if you just inspect what you're doing and whether it's actually even making a difference, because it might not be as important as you expect. So that's sort of my mantra is not motion, do momentum, and make sure you're working on the right things.
Love it. What about you, Erika?
I'll go back to something I said earlier, like we don't want to be the emergency room doctors. So if we are doing the right things up front, if we're having the wellness checks, if we're understanding the success plans, if we know what success looks like and how to measure it back for our customers, we're building a better foundation to avoid risk and churn later on. But if you find yourself in the emergency room and you've got that, red customer or, bad patient, don't be afraid to put up your hand and ask for help. Because sometimes, as we said, customer success is a company sport and we might need another expert to come in and help. So I always want my team to feel like if you get there, put up your hand, we're here to help.
Completely agree. Well, thank you all for joining and being a part of this panel today. We really appreciate it. I definitely learned a lot. And with that, thank you all for joining the session. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.